and it is that proof that I'm going to demonstrate to you now. The proof exists in the form of a code that has several names, one of which is the Anna code, because Anna created it, another is Sion, another is the rose, another is the rock, because Sion is the biblical rock, and another is the seventh seal code. The demonstration that follows is a short demonstration that should enable you to see most of the aspects of the code, from which you'll get a good idea about the incredible plan that was pre-coded into the key that I got led to. I hope you enjoy the demonstration. Brilliant, man. Someone upstairs. Three and a half years after the ultimatum had been delivered and no positive response had been given or shown by the governments and institutions who knew about it, their time was up. They had been given 3.5 years free time in which to start implementing the policies that had been suggested to them in the ultimatum, and they didn't do it. At that point, Anna provided me with, or started to provide me with, the proof that I needed to be able to show the world that they have hidden the ultimatum. The way it happened was like this. We were in Australia, in a place called Cobram in Victoria, when a friend lent me a book that was all about symbols. It was an old book, a book called The Lost Language of Symbolism, by a man named Harold Bailey. Now, in the chapter about the meaning of the symbol bell, I found a curious thing. Now, my mother's maiden name is Blease, spelt like this. Now, Blease is not a very common name, and so when I found in the chapter about bell that there was a statement that told me that Blease has the meaning bell, I thought that there must be some reason why I had had to come upon that very strange piece of information. But it wasn't until 2 months later that a sequence of synchronicities started happening that eventually led me to the reason why I had to know that the meaning of my mother's name, Blease, is bell. Now, by that time, the Kelly family, along with the Dixon family, were working in an apple orchard in Orange, in New South Wales. And one day, on a Friday, at lunchtime, we had gone outside the orchard to have our lunch. While we were sitting on the grass eating our sandwiches, 2 dogs came running towards us, and I noticed that the dog in front, which was a Dalmatian, was wearing a name tag on its collar. Now the dog ran up to Elaine and stood in front of her, and I asked Elaine to have a look at the name tag and tell me what it said. Now the name on the dog's tag was Bella. I knew at the time that there was a reason why I had to ask Elaine to look at the dog's name tag, but I couldn't figure for the life of me why I had to know that the dog's name was Bella. Now the next thing that started happening is that the dogs ran away and it started to rain. Now that meant that we got the afternoon off from apple picking, because you can't pick apples when they're wet because they mark, the skins mark. So we got the afternoon off despite the fact that the rain then stopped. Taking advantage of the free day, we decided to take our children for a run up a mountain about 10 kilometres away from the orchard named Mount Cannabis. So having done that, on our way home we stopped at a cafe at a road junction at the base of the mountain. Now in that cafe, the woman who served us, having no other customers to attend to, came out to chat with us. And she was carrying in her arms a little puppy dog. So when she came up to our table, she put the dog down on the ground and engaged us in conversation. 5 minutes later, a customer arrived and the woman had to leave us and go and attend to her job. But she forgot to pick up the little dog. She walked away from our table and then realised that she needed the dog, so she turned round and called to it. And the name that she called, surprisingly, was Bella. When that happened, Elaine just looked at me, and because we both knew that something strange was happening. We knew that it was not by chance that we had come upon two dogs named Bella on the same day, 10 kilometres apart, after having never, ever known a dog called Bella in our entire lives before. So it was a little clue that made me think. Now that night, back at the orchard, lying in my sleeping bag in my tent, I thought about it and thought, what the heck is this about? Why Bella? Bella? And I realised that I hadn't actually seen the name tag, so I didn't know exactly how the Bella on the dog's name tag was spelt. I realised it could have two L's or a single L, but that it probably had two. Elaine was sleeping, so I didn't want to disturb her and ask her. So I was mulling it over in my mind in my sleeping bag, and I realised that Bella is an anagram of a bell. Now, still at this point I didn't see the significance of that. Then I thought about the Bella with the single letter L and realised that it was an anagram of either the word Able, A-B-L-E, or the name Abel, A-B-E-L. But again, having no connection that led me to any conclusion, I decided to drop it and I went off to sleep. Now the next day was a Saturday, and I had already arranged to go to Orange to a Xerox shop to make a photocopy of a document that I intended to send to a well-known man in Australia. In that Xerox shop, I found myself standing next to a poster on the wall that had one word on it in big print, and that word was the word Able, spelt A-B-E-L. Now, because that was the last thing that I'd thought about the night before, I realised that I was being given a continued prompt that was linking me somehow, or for some reason, to something to do with either a bell or Able or something of that nature. So I then looked around to see if there were any other clues in the Xerox shop, and found that there were. There was actually one very big one. On a table next to me, well, about 6 feet away from me, there were a stack of magazines. And the top magazine was the 25th anniversary edition of Bell magazine. And because the number 7 had played such a significant role in the synchronicity that had taught us about synchronicity in the beginning in 1996, and because 25 adds up to 7, I realised that some very significant synchronicity was occurring, and that it was linked to the subject Bell. Now, shortly after being in the Xerox shop, we had to leave the orchard in Orange and head to Agneswater in Queensland, a place to which we had been invited by a good friend named Rob, who was a professional fruit picker that we had met in Orange the year before. So we set off on our journey to Rob's house in Agneswater, which was a long way away. But we found that during that journey, the bell synchronicity happened time after time after time. Every time we stopped the car, something happened involving a connection to a bell, or simply the word bell was very prominent at the place where we stopped. When we arrived at Rob's place, we moved into the caravan in his garden that he had said to move into, and the clock on the wall was a bell clock. It just had the single word bell written on it in big letters. A couple of days later, Rob and his son Daniel arrived in Agneswater and moved into the house. So we went inside into Rob's kitchen to tell him about the bell synchronicity that was happening, and to explain that we didn't yet understand the full reason why it was occurring. While we were sitting at Rob's kitchen table, Rob's son Daniel informed us that they had an old bell upstairs that had been in the family for several generations and had been left to Rob by his grandmother when she died. So he volunteered to go up there and get it in case it had any connection to the reason for the bell synchronicity. Now the bell that Daniel brought down was an antique, and it turned out to be a thing called an Agnes bell. It's a ceremonial bell that was used in the Catholic Church to proclaim the arrival of the Lamb of God. Now, on the bell there were several embossed motifs. The bell was made of brass or bronze, and one of the motifs was a picture of a lamb, and above the lamb was the word Agnes in Latin, with the V as the letter U, as Latin spelt things. So this was a big clue for me, because I realised that we were sitting in Agneswater, and on looking up the meaning of the word Agnes in a dictionary, we discovered that it means lamb. So I knew that there was something very significant about the fact that we were in Agneswater at the time that we saw the Agnes clue on the bell during the chain of bell synchronicity. Now the next clue came when I turned around and noticed that Rob's telephone number was an anagram of our old telephone number, our local telephone number in Scotland. I noticed that telephones were connected to the bell synchronicity for the obvious reason that they have bells on them, and that they were invented by a man named Alexander Graham Bell. Another little fact that came to my attention at that time is that the mayor of Agneswater was named John Bell. The telephone number was a 3-figure number, and the numbers were 523. Now in Tainault, near Oban, where we lived, our local number had been 235. So I thought it rather curious that I should have come upon that, and I wondered if there was anything meaningful about it. Now the next day, I went to the end of Rob's garden to check the mailbox, and on a post was the lot number of Rob's property, which I noticed was 352, same three numbers. So that made me very curious. I knew that there must be something about those three numbers that I needed to investigate. So I went back into Rob's house, and I found some paper and pen, and I wrote out the single-digit numerological alphabet, because the digits in those numbers were not double digits. It was all about single digits. When I did that, I made the startling discovery that the three numbers that had been brought to my attention actually spelled the word bell phonetically in the numerological alphabet, because the letter B is number 2, the letter E is number 5, and the letter L is number 3. So the very three letters that I had been, or numbers that I had been led to observe, spell that. Now, the next thing I did, because it was anagrams of the numbers that had happened before I had looked at this, I started looking at anagrams of the letters. Now, they're very simple, 3 letters. But the first thing I noticed was that when I did this, and moved the three letters to BLE, I was looking at the first three letters of my mother's maiden name. Please